like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity with business owners. And today's podcast is going to be about risk. So, my finance degree, the number one thing that they taught in the Bachelor of Science in Finance is risk and return. Higher risk, higher return. It's actually a natural law. It works if it's legal or illegal. Like, no government can go ahead and override it. It's a natural law. It's like the law of gravity. And so being able to understand that law is really important in business. So high risk, high return, low risk, low return. If somebody's telling you that you can get a high return with low risk, one of two things is true. One is they're stupid. They don't understand. That's not possible. It's not. Two is they're lying and stealing. It's not, so they're either stupid. So that's not how the world works. I'm not saying it's a never possibility. I'm just saying, by and large, just think of it as never being a possibility. So when you look at interest rates, interest rates probably for consumer homes, for residential mortgages are probably the lowest that you'll get. So there's different ratings. And so you have AAA ratings. And so I think it's Standard & Poor's and Moody's, they rate companies for credit risk, and they hire in the consumer market, it's the credit scoring. So your lower your credit score is, the higher interest rate you're going to pay. So what they're doing is they're looking at predictable risk, like the higher the risk, the higher the return. And so in understanding that, that's really, really important on investing your money, investing your time, your 7 T's: time, talents, treasure, trust, truth, temple, and thought. Those 7 T's to stewardship are really important in getting a financial return. So when you're investing into anything, you're looking at your risk, and the higher the risk, the higher your return must be. Questions?
So does that mean, like, if there's something that's risky, that would be a good idea, good investment?
So when you look at it, no, it means that you're going to get you better get a higher return on that investment. So if it's higher risk, so if you put your money in, a CD at a bank and it's insured, let's say it's 4.5% interest rate. Well, if you get a commercial loan, it's not going to be 4.5%. It's going to be maybe 50% higher. It might be 6%. Or I'm sorry, if your mortgage is going to be, if your mortgage is 7% interest rate, if you have a commercial, because commercial is a higher risk than residential. Residential homes, people don't give up their homes. They just don't. So they're going to fight more for it. If it's an investment property, it's going to be a higher interest rate because people are more likely to allow a foreclosure on an investment property. So let's say your home mortgage rate is going to be 7%. If it's a commercial, if you're renting it out, it might be, 8 or 9%. If it's a business loan for business equipment, it might be 12 to 15%. Because the collateral that you have against it, you buy a $50,000 truck and you drive it off the lot, it's worth $40,000 or $35,000. And it can be gone, it can be stolen, it can be real estate is going to be solid. Like, you can't move real estate, it's there. And so when you're looking at financial returns, it's risk return. The higher the risk, the higher the return. So if you have these two personalities, the analytic or the driver and the expressive, tend to be higher risk type of people. The analytic and the amiable tend to be lower risk. This is why the analytical is really susceptible to scams, because the analytic thinks that they're really smart. So scams often go ahead and appeal to the analytic. It's why they're so vulnerable, because they can't see the big picture. They're very vulnerable to being scammed because they'll have tons of data, charts and graphs and everything, and the analytic loves all of that. And only the smart people invest into this. And so the analytic, you'd think, would be the smartest of the four, but they're not. They don't see the big picture. So they're often the ones that get scammed. So if you go ahead and have a 50% return, if you have a 50% return, is that better than a 10%? Well, no, it's higher, but you might have on the, 10% return, or you might have a 95% chance that you're going to get all your money back and the return. On the 50% return, you might go ahead and only get, you might have a 70% chance that you're going to get it back. You might have a 30% chance you're going to lose all your money. So risk and return. So you never want to risk more than you're able to lose.
That makes sense.
And so, questions, anybody?
What if something is risky to one person, but not necessarily to another, because someone else maybe, I don't know, they educated themselves on the risk, or they learned something about that in theory lowers the risk. Does that change the natural law?
It's theory, right? And so things are risky, whether it is true that if you're educated, you theoretically lower the risk. So if you know what you're doing, then you have, rather than a 50% chance of loss, you might only have a 30% chance of loss. Now you can often work your way out of losses just through hard work, like if you're doing rehab. And so, when you look at some real estate property we had in Illinois, me not knowing one piece of information cost us well over 20,000 and maybe 40,000. I didn't know one piece of information I didn't know. And that information cost somewhere between 20 and 40, $50,000. Just really. And there's people in my world that knew that, but I didn't ask the right questions and they weren't aware. They didn't think to tell me that. And so in the end, I pay. The owner always pays. The owner always pays. And whoever pays, learns the most, the one who pays. Other questions?
No.
What's the difference between being high risk and stupid?
Right? Great question. And so being stupid is taking high risk when you can't afford to have the loss. That's stupid. Being stupid is think that you can game the system and you can go ahead and win, like gambling. There's professional gamblers out there. There's actually gamblers that are so good that they're so good they know how to count cards. So they're so good that Vegas and all of the the casinos won't allow them into their casinos. So, so stupid is thinking you're smarter than the system and not being smarter, that the risks don't apply to you, that you can afford to risk it. You're not going to lose it. That's just stupid. So questions?
I don't think so.
So, there's, I don't know, maybe another podcast to follow up. So in my finance degree, there were 4 investments. One had a 50% return, one had an 8% return, one had a 25% return, and one had, I don't know, 30% return. So there was this grid. And they asked, which one would you invest into? So what's the answer?
Depends.
On.
The risk.
So you have the risk factor. So the 150%, you might have the risk. This is decision making. So this is decision making. And so, and being able to go through. And so the risk is a factor. What else?
The amount lost you can take.
That's risk. So, so yeah, can you afford to lose the money? So that's connected into the risk. What else? So another factor in the decision making is, do you have the money to invest? Like if the 50% return requires $1 million and you don't have $1 million, you can't invest because you don't have the money. So do you have the money to invest into it? It's another obvious factor. What's another factor?
Knowledge.
So yeah, is it going to require knowledge to go ahead and get the return? Another factor is when the return's going to come. Like maybe the return is going to come in 5 years, but you need the money in 6 months. Well, you can't invest into something so it can tie up your capital. Questions? So what's the difference, between, investment and a loan?
Investment's a lot higher return.
You hope it is. You hope investment because there's going to be higher risk. So let's say, I don't know, let's make up a case study here. Anybody got a good case study? Here's a
Not a
case.
case study, but I could.
Here's a case study. So let's do a case study. Let's say that there were 2 people that were investing into, let's say, a piece of real estate. And, so they're investing in 50-50. And so, let's say that one of the investors said, yeah, buy it, sell it. Yeah, I don't care what you do with it. Is that investor saying, I don't care what kind of return I'm getting from it? Is that what the investor is saying?
No.
Probably not. And so are they looking at getting a return like they would in a bank? Probably not. But what if, investor A is the managing partner of it and they did all the work and now all of a sudden it's worth, $100,000 more than it was when they invest. And, investor A did the physical work to make it happen. So who should get that? Should they both get it equally?
Investor A should have recorded his hours and been paid hourly, and then they should have split the profit.
So if you go ahead and look at that, if you look at that. And so, well, what if, so learning how to look at people from different perspectives is really important. Like it's very, very important. Like we see our own perspective. So let's say hypothetically I was investor B. And I'm like, well, investor A is probably going to say, well, I did all the work and I did all of this. And so you get a 10% or 15% return or whatever on it. And well, how much of a return is it? But I did all the work. But investor B, what could they be thinking?
Well, the work that they did.
Well, but let's say they really didn't do any work.
All the money they invested.
Let's say it wasn't that much. So when we talk about work, a lot of times people think of either physical work, not the mental work. And so was there any work? Well, they saw the opportunity. And so they might have had 30 years of work that built up to have it. So investor B could say, well, investor A wouldn't even have it if it wasn't for me. So this is where, okay, both sides, if you can take both sides and you can see both sides, then you're able to create lifelong relationships. And so you can say, well, here's, a scenario A, here's scenario B. And then here's scenario, then, partner A could say, well, this is what I'd like it to do. I'm not saying it's the fair or the right thing to do. I'm just saying this is what I'd like to do. It may not be A, it might not be B, it may be some hybrid in between. And hopefully what would happen is in an ideal partnership, partner A would be more generous than partner B, and partner B would say, oh, that's way too generous. No, it's like both parties would come away and they think, I got the better deal out of this. This is not easy. It's not easy in a marriage because we tend to overvalue our own strengths and undervalue our own weaknesses. We tend to overvalue what we've contributed and undervalue what somebody else contributed. And then people can get hurt. And they often won't even know they're hurt because they're not self-aware. We're not self-aware as human beings. Like, I am hurt. Like, that hurt me. So we won't know, especially men. Like, so they're not like, why am I feeling what I'm feeling? Well, and so in developing lifelong business partnerships, those partnerships can evolve and change. So, when our oldest daughter got married, my relationship with her changed. When she, owned a company that was working very heavily with me, and then she started another company that wasn't working at all with me, our relationship changed. It's okay to change. But how do we create lifelong relationships? Like, how do we make sure the business never goes ahead and destroys the relationship? A great follow-up case study would be with Ken and him being in business with his two brothers. And man, did that bad boy go south. And so how do you prevent, especially as younger business owners, how do you go ahead, and so often you can have something happen. Business, the thing I hate about business is it's not black and white. So often what happens in business is it's the golden rule. And the golden rule in business, whoever's got the gold rules. And so whoever's got the most leverage, but it's not just leverage. You know, this is why I've heard people won't go into 50-50 partnerships because nobody's got control. And there's a good argument for that. My company, you know, my 3 business partners I had, they went ahead and said, Mark, we don't think you have the maturity or experience to have majority ownership. I'm like, okay, what are you thinking? And they're like, we're thinking 51% versus, and you get 49%. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then after 15 months, then it's going to switch. And you're going to get 51%. We're going to have 49. I'm like, that sounds fair. I can do that. And then after 15 months, they dropped out. I'm like, really? So, and I'm not saying they should have or shouldn't have. I'm just saying it was devastating. You know, I'm like, there is no way that I'm going to survive.
But you
You
did.
know? And I did.
Nice.
I think God's sovereignty, I can say God's grace. But I remember, I mean, just devastating to myself and my wife, and they were very good friends. Like, you know, very good friends. And that blew apart the entire friendship on how that was handled. And so, you know, and understanding all of these things is not easy. It's not, you know, it's not black and white. We often tend, and as we get older or more educated, like education, I got 3 degrees. I'm really smart. Are you, Mark? Like, and so again, I like to go ahead and go back to, you know, when I was a kid and there were, you know, 2 kids that had one piece of pie, one slice of pie left. And my parents would go ahead and be like, okay, one of you cut it and the other one gets to choose. Then nobody wanted to cut it because then you'd measure it out and make sure. But if the person who cuts it gets to choose, it's like, oh, I'll cut it here. And so, you know, whatever your religious beliefs are, some would say it's karma. I don't know. You know, what goes around comes around. You know, you reap what you sow. There's a whole bunch of different things. I'm just saying I have found in life that that the rules will get switched on you, flipped on you. The power will get flipped. And again, I'm not just talking, a lot of that may be age. And so older men, I think, often take advantage of younger men. I hope I never do that. I try really hard not to. You know, and I can't use an excuse of, well, I didn't purposely do it. That's just for stupid people. I didn't intentionally hurt you. Really? That just reveals how stupid you are. I didn't think you intentionally hurt me. You just did it because you're stupid, because you're inconsiderate. So I've seen a number of older men that have taken advantage, or majority ownership take advantage of minority ownership. And so I'd say be really, really careful what you think is fair. If you were in the opposite situation, would you really consider it fair? So this lesson is more about not just risk and return. It's about a whole bunch of other things that are really cool. So hopefully this podcast was helpful for everybody. Pass it along to other people. You know, as we help them, they help us, and together we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.